These days, the idea of Robert Downey Jr. not getting roles seems like a wild and a foreign concept, but there are a number of movies throughout the years that he either lost or turned down. Many of them proved to be career-making roles for other actors, which could have led him down a totally different path. So today, we'll be discussing a number of the what-ifs of Robert Downey Jr.'s career and roles that he did not get before landing Iron Man. Who would have thought that Tony Stark could have been the one that Deadpool and all of these other scenes were referencing with this parody? Yes, there was a time when Robert Downey Jr. was considered for the role of Lloyd Dobler in Cameron Crowe's classic Say Anything. That image of John Cusack holding up the boombox would become one of the most memorable cinematic moments, let alone among the entire pop culture lexicon. I mean, you don't even have to have seen the film to at least recognize it among the countless parodies. Cameron Crowe initially wrote the role with Cusack in mind, who had played a teenager multiple times before. Having been 23 at the time, Crowe was worried that he wouldn't want to play a teen yet again, so decided to offer the role to Robert Downey Jr., who, funny enough, is a year older than Cusack. Well, we all know how well that turned out, as Downey ultimately turned down the role, and the rest is history. One of the epitome films of the John Hughes Brat Pack era, Pretty in Pink is another landmark that Robert Downey Jr. was nearly cast in. He was among several actors associated with the Brat Pack of the 1980s, as he starred alongside many of them and was one of those teen sensations. Molly Ringwald even fought for him to star in the role of Ducky in the film, which would have made it a totally different dynamic. Spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, I mean, you had like 35 years to watch it. The original ending had her character Andy end up with Ducky, which is the version that Ringwald wanted Downey to play. However, they of course went the route of making him more of a brother type character, which John Cryer would end up playing. See, even back then, while he wasn't a genius billionaire yet, Downey was still considered a playboy. Speaking of playboys, another part that Downey almost had was JD in Thelma and Louise. The role went through a long casting process with several big names auditioning for it, like George Clooney, Dermot Mulroney, Mark Ruffalo. However, they were all turned down, and William Baldwin was actually cast in the part before he backed out to star in Ron Howard's Backdraft. At this point, Downey had read the script and really wanted the part, but was actually turned down due to being too short. In a world where Tom Cruise is a superstar, who would have thought that would be an issue? All due respect to Ethan Hunt, the charming southern grifter who swindles the duo of ladies for their money. JD is a role that Downey could have pulled off well, and who would not want to see him conjure up a southern accent? However, it was for the best, as the role would help establish an up-and-coming Brad Pitt as the totally not good-looking pretty boy of Hollywood. Who would not want to star alongside Kurt Russell, and as a superhero no less? No, I'm not talking about Sky High, although that would have been cool. No, I'm talking about real-life superheroes, because Downey auditioned as firefighter Brian McCaffrey in Backdraft. Funny enough, this is the role that William Baldwin left the part of JD in Thelma and Louise for, and Brad Pitt also auditioned for this one. Guess a lot of the same guys go for these roles, huh? Well, when you've got a film starring Kurt Russell, Donald Sutherland, and Robert De Niro, how could you not want to be in it? The film follows Brian McCaffrey, who joins his older brother Steven, played by Kurt Russell, in the Chicago Fire Department. It would have been interesting to see Downey play alongside Kurt Russell as his big brother. The two have such a strong screen presence that there's no doubt it would have been an interesting dynamic to see play out. Now that I think about it, they need to do a film together. Someone go and pitch an Ego and Tony movie real quick. As mentioned before, Robert Downey Jr. has had a very turbulent career, and around the time of the late 90s is when that came to a head. He was actually cast in the sleazy neo-noir Wild Things as the guidance counselor Sam Lombardo because of his earned reputation as a playboy. However, he was unfortunately dropped due to his personal behavior during the time of production. Suffice to say that he would have been an inspired choice for the role in this twist-filled movie, but it obviously just wasn't meant to be. Speaking of sleazy movies, remember Basic Instinct 2? Yeah, me neither. At least I can try not to. Yes, the sequel to the 1992 hit thriller was in development hell for many years, with much of the original cast and crew, including Michael Douglas and director Paul Verhoeven, not wanting involvement in it, save for Sharon Stone. Listen, when you hear that the original creative team behind a hit film doesn't want involvement in it, that's usually a sign, I'd assume. Downey must have known this, as he was offered a leading role in the film, but as evidenced in the final product, dodged a major bullet with that. Or should I say ice pick? Tony Stark may not have been the first mechanically enhanced role of Downey's career. When originally casting for the titular role in Edward Scissorhands, there were a number of actors in consideration for the now classic Tim Burton film. And as you guessed, Downey's name was thrown in alongside other small-timers like Gary Oldman, Tom Hanks, and Tom Cruise. The concept of a role like Edward is so outlandish that it's intriguing to imagine just about anyone playing him. But perhaps for the best, it ended up being played beautifully by the only man who could have done it. Johnny Depp. This is one of those scenarios where I'm curious to see how it would have played out with anyone else, as the role would obviously prove to be one of Depp's most iconic. It helped establish his presence as an offbeat leading man for years to come, and cement his spot in Hollywood. Oh, and not to mention a long and prosperous collaborative relationship with director Tim Burton. Could this have been the path Downey took? Like, could you picture him in the role of Edward? I mean, just think of him playing a character that was known for being silent and communicated charisma through body language instead of dialogue. Kinda reminds you of Charlie Chaplin. Oh, wait. It's hard to imagine anyone else besides Ralph Macchio playing Daniel LaRusso, but the Karate Kid himself recently revealed a number of actors who auditioned for the iconic role, including Charlie Sheen, and you guessed it, Nicolas Cage! Oh, and Robert Downey Jr. Yep, we could have seen him running a car dealership in Cobra Kai. Karate Kid is another film that would go on to be a cultural phenomenon, obviously propelling Ralph Macchio's career and going on to spawn the hit Netflix series. But as much as I'd want to have seen Downey in the role, it's kinda hard to imagine someone with his effortlessly cool energy and charisma getting bullied. Of course, that's why it's called acting, right? The role would also be a more physical challenge for him. Now, we've seen Downey take on fight-heavy roles in more recent years, such as some of his non-suited-up moments in the MCU and the Sherlock Holmes films, but it's fun to imagine him in such a physically demanding role at such a young age. It definitely would have propelled him to superstardom much earlier in his career, too. But as we all know, history went the way it did, and he ended up trading one LaRusso for two LaRussos, huh? Am I right? Okay, I'll see myself out. Speaking of rejections, he was nearly turned down for Iron Man. Supposedly, Marvel didn't want Downey because of his questionable past, but Jon Favreau actually fought for his casting, insistent that he was the right guy for the job. Now, if there's one thing I don't want to see, it's the reality where Marvel did not listen to him.